Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to, let's say, see you today. And I'm really also a little bit jealous, if I may, as I'm currently in quarantine in Hong Kong, but I'm getting out tomorrow. So I also look forward to see many of you soon. I'm, of course, really excited to be moderating this panel with 4 amazing experts from pretty much all around the world. Today, we will be speaking about different things, mostly investment trends and market trends in China, US, India, and all around the world, and also how technology can make education more effective and also accessible. And we will also, I know there are many startups connected as well, so we will also talking about some funding trends and some funding methodologies, essentially, that we see investors using when investing in startups. As I was saying, I'm really excited to have 4 amazing experts with me. And I'll just briefly say a few things about them because I'm really always astonished about their background. I have the pleasure of having Bill Ning, founding partner of Blue Capital with us. Bill started his education investment career in 2014 at the Strategic Investment Department of TAL. He invested so far in more than 100 education investments, and he has more than 17 years of experience in the operation and management of education companies. We also have Yat Siu, founder and chief executive officer of Outplace. Outplace is a digital services and technologies, smartphone and tablet software development. And Yat is also the founder and board director of mobile games developer Animonica, which recently also just became a unicorn. We also have Vinit Sukhia, partner of Learn Capital, one of the leading investors in EdTech from the US and actually globally. Vinit was also a teacher, and he led the Teach for America social entrepreneurship and innovation initiatives, where he supported and invested also in more than 200 early stage education entrepreneurs. He was also shortlisted as Forbes 30 under 30 in education in 2015. And then last but not least, we have also James Tiang, co-founder and managing partner of Lumos Capital. Lumos is a growth equity firm focused on education and human capital development, also from the US, but also investing globally. And James also has more than 15 years of investing experience and led more than 20 transactions and having deployed more than 1.5 billion USD. So I'm really personally looking forward to hearing your insights, and I'm again so excited to be moderating this panel. So officially welcome you guys. Maybe I will start with Bill. And if we look at trends, I'm very curious to hear also what the audience has to say. If we look at the trends in the past, China has really been the leader when it comes to investments in EdTech. But 2021 was really a year of drastic changes. Bill, what trends are you seeing right now in China?
As you all know, in June and July, and the Chinese government have put new regulations on education, and it basically bans the after-school tutoring for K-12. So the market shrinks. You know, in the last 5 to 10 years, the K-12 after tutoring market is the largest market in EdTech in China, and many companies booms in the last decades, and we got several decacorns in the US markets and dozens of unicorns in this area. But this year, and the governments in China put new regulations on this area and make all those listed EdTech companies to turn from for-profit to non-profit. So that's the most drastic change in China. So we are looking for new spaces for EdTech investment, and now we are basically focusing on 3 areas. In age groups, we focus more on vocational training and upskilling for college students and adults. You know, the governments want all the capital, no matter the private capital and public capital, to get into this area, because you know, in China, after the 9th grade, 50% of the students are sent to vocational training path, and originally this area is less funded, and we do not have a very good supply here. So the governments give a new college entrance examination for these students, and they want to invest more in career-oriented universities, and they want more vocational trainings for these half students. So it's a new trend in EdTech investment. The second part is for the K-12 schools and kindergartens, because the governments do not want after-school tutoring, so they have to strengthen the schools and kindergartens. So as for education IPs and education content and SaaS services for K-12 schools are welcomed in China. Also, the third part is that we are not only the large companies, but also the small companies wants to find ways outside of China, because they already have their teams, they have their products, and they have their technology, and they want to expand outside of China, because we have many good education services and education products, like AI math classes and AI drawing classes. So the third investment trend in China is to find ways for these companies to have some market for outside China. But most of them are starting with the Chinese people outside China. So that's the trend in China. But also one thing is interesting is that basically it takes about 3 to 6 months for the Chinese EdTech market to change, and both the government and the industry are seeing drastic changes in this field. So when there are more feedbacks, we are looking forward to see some change in regulations, and see where are some new opportunities can emerge in this field. That's my opinion, Alessandro.
That's really interesting, and it also shows really from, it doesn't matter what happens, there is always an opportunity and essentially new trends that emerge. It's really fascinating. And now moving to the east to the west, and talking about the US. I was recently looking at the new investment trends, and US has already doubled the investments in EdTech versus 2020, which is of course really impressive, because we are already talking about an important number. I personally believe it's just the beginning, but I'm sure I'm really looking forward to hear what James thinks. Also, globally, we also saw more than 60% of deals going specifically to higher education and upskilling startups. So that's really interesting trend as well. We would love to hear more from you, James.
Thanks, Alessandro. In the US, I mean, much like the rest of the world, we're seeing very strong tailwinds really across the full age spectrum. So yes, there is certainly an emphasis on the upskilling in higher education or alternatives to higher education space. But, you know, even in early education, you know, in the US, it's called universal pre-K, as the large kind of push of funding dollars to create more accessible ways to bring kids into that learning environment sooner. A lot of that, you know, has been ongoing with the recognition that, you know, learning starts even at, you know, 3, 5, 6 months old, right? And so what used to be called childcare really is early education. And so there's a big push in terms of bringing that to bear to more and more people through things like universal pre-K programs. And I think beyond that, in terms of EdTech, the push around gamified education has certainly, caught a lot of momentum, where families are allocating, parts of their disposable income through subscription models and other forms of online learning, again, for even for young kids, right? With K-12 today, as we're, hopefully on the, beginnings of recovering truly from this global pandemic, there is a lot of funding that is available, particularly in the US right now. The stimulus funding is unprecedented in the amount of dollars available, specifically targeting technologies and services that can mitigate the learning loss that we're all grappling as a society today. There's also been a renewed push into social emotional learning and mitigating sort of problems that can transpire with things like mental health and other issues that we're seeing more and more today. In higher education, certainly in the US, what we're seeing is actually a decline in the overall enrollment of traditional higher education. A lot of that has been ongoing because the cost, candidly, is just too high. It's too inaccessible for many parts of the population, and it's more pronounced in a place like the US, even relative to some other developed markets. And so this idea of how do you create more ROI, or return on investment, for that traditional higher education experience is really pronounced. And so you can tackle it either lowering the cost of education, perhaps with online modalities, or you can deliver more return by creating more connectivity to the employer side, making sure that as an institution of learning, you are delivering on the promise of giving the skills that then lead into employment. And lastly, I would say, in terms of upskilling and reskilling, to your point, Alessandro, the non-degree space is absolutely booming. Vinit can talk about some of the companies in his portfolio, but corporate funding is much more available today, and certainly from the lens of education as a benefit, as either a driver for retention, or frankly, reskilling your workforce and allowing them to find other jobs that frankly demand skills that they don't have, is certainly top of mind for many, many employers and corporations. So I would say, as a package across the age spectrum, we're seeing a lot of tailwinds that are creating investable opportunities.
Fantastic, and I guess this also really, I love, of course, the title of this event, that really also shows how EdTech is becoming something completely different, completely transformative, more complex as an industry, also as for example, we mentioned before fintech, right? It's really the very beginning, and it's great to see so many different applications and so many different transformative forces in the market. That's really exciting. And Vinit, from your side, you also look and invest and also invested in great companies, market leaders in both US and India, for example. What are the trends, some of the key trends that you see?
Yeah, definitely. So first off, it's a pleasure to be here with the fellow panelists, and hope everyone is having a good time so far. The India market is in a really, really interesting place right now. This is a market that's been maturing for probably the better part of the last decade or so. And as digital infrastructure has grown across India, not just in tier 1 cities, but also pan-India, right, in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, the sort of wide-scale adoption of mobile technology, dramatic improvements in broadband speed. I think what you've seen as a result is that we finally have the precedent conditions for a lot of new, really interesting category creation within education technology. So I know there's a lot of different ways to sort of slice and dice a market within education. I would say the way that we primarily think about EdTech in India right now is that there's become a really clear bifurcation in the types of companies that are coming to market in India. So, the first category, and this is the category that quite frankly has driven the hefty majority of enterprise value in India for, I would say, the last decade or so. And these are really what we call, quote unquote, content first companies, right? So these are companies that are effectively developing their own content. Usually it's in-house. It's either asynchronous content or synchronous content sold on an a la carte or subscription basis. But, given the sort of very large, high stakes test prep sort of culture in India, I think that we've seen that so far it's content first companies that have really dominated the day across the country, right? So goes without saying, but Byju's, which is the largest private education technology company in the world, is probably 12 to 18 months away from an IPO. This is the company that pioneered content first education across the Indian market. But even beyond that, if you look at the sort of second and third most valuable companies across the Indian context, they're still content first, right? So companies like Unacademy, companies like Upgrad, right, which is providing sort of postgraduate certificate programs in partnership with leading universities around the world. Historically, content first companies across the age spectrum, but primarily through, I would say, lower secondary, upper secondary, and post-secondary, content first companies have really sort of owned the day across India. And a lot of these companies now, like I said, they're 12 to 18 months away from exit, hopefully a strong public market outcome. But beyond that, they're also working really hard right now to consolidate the content first market, right? So we have just seen tremendous M&A activity across the highest about the first, second, and third highest valued EdTech companies in India, and they have a tendency to acquire other content first companies that are effectively building, I would say, like 2 or 3 large content first behemoths across the country. And these are the companies that we think are really going to be able to succeed in the long run. And then, the second part of this broad bifurcation that we're seeing in the market, this is a really sort of more nascent trend across the Indian ecosystem, but it's one that's really, really exciting to us. So as an interesting foil to content first companies, you effectively get what we call quote unquote infrastructure companies, right? So, India in particular has a $30–40 billion offline after school tutoring market, and one that has sustained sort of the high stakes test prep culture in India for well over 2 decades. And so what we've seen, and this is largely a result of COVID-19 and a lot of coaching centers and independent tutors all of a sudden having to run their businesses online because they could no longer do it in person, we started to see sort of the blossoming of sort of a new next generation class of companies that are building more digital infrastructure, but for the historically offline sector, right? So companies in our portfolio, like a Teachment, for example, which is effectively like a Shopify for independent tutors, they developed their own proprietary video technology that allows coaching centers or independent tutors to directly bring their businesses online, right? So it's a full stack, mobile first, effectively software suite where within 30 seconds, any tutor can bring their business online. So that's just one example, but there's any number of other companies that are building what we consider to be the next generation of digital infrastructure across the Indian ecosystem, where they're either partnering with independent tutors or coaching centers, or they're partnering with schools as well, right? So, online degrees in India were just legalized via the national education policy several years ago. And so we're seeing any number of players who are trying to act as like an online program manager to help run degree programs for universities online in India. So this is all to say, even though sort of content first companies have owned the day so far in India, and these are companies that we hope have really strong exits for everyone involved, we're just as equally excited about these new up and coming digital infrastructure plays that are helping to sort of augment the very large pre-existing offline market in India. So really exciting trends on both of these fronts. And, we at Learn have been very lean forward on the Indian market for several years now. So continue to watch the market very closely and look forward to making many more investments there in the future.
Fantastic. And talking about next generation digital education and next generation technologies, my next question is for you. And you are a pioneer of innovative technologies, we can say, including blockchain and AI. How do you see education evolving and really EdTech pushing the boundaries of education in the next few years? We talk a lot, especially these days, about the metaverse. So maybe you have some thoughts about it.
No, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with such a distinguished panel. So I think, one of the biggest challenges, of course, that I think that everyone is well aware of is with a future that is changing so fast, how is it really possible to prepare, our children, or even the current sort of labor force as to what's happening? I mean, the metaverse is a great example because, made probably even bigger just with today's announcement with Microsoft and just last week with Facebook rebranding the Meta. But the metaverse really has been shaping itself up, if you think about it, in a larger force in the last 3 to 4 years. But as a concept, with the beginning of the internet, this meta concept, living a virtual life and having a full existence in the virtual plane, is really something that's been developing over quite some time. And I think this is one of the challenges as well now, that there's a bifurcation in terms of awareness, because our children are very much native to this environment and it feels natural. For instance, just ask what our children want for Christmas. Very likely they want something virtual. They don't want something physical. Whereas actually, for parents and the older generation, it's hard to make that connection. They can't understand it. Which was not necessarily true even 50 years ago, where from a generational understanding, you actually knew what was going on, right? So meaning that even within your own family, you might be having 3 to 4 generations of understanding because of where the industry is, right? When you take a look at, for instance, blockchain or crypto, or, like mobile or just social, these are all waves that actually happened in rapid development, literally over the course of really just 10, 15 years, which is, in the traditional sense, not even considered one generation, but you've basically sort of gone through that so quickly. So I think there's a reframing needed, and it's challenging because the education system is very much sort of built, it's sort of within the, let's call it, constructs of physical limitations, right? And is not preparing itself for the exponential opportunities that actually are developing in the real world, right? So the challenging thing there, therefore, is that how are our children, and also actually you've just the new people sort of coming into this world. And I think when you look at, as an example with the metaverse, actually in places like the Philippines, with games like Axie Infinity, which is one of our portfolios, you have millions of people now making an income that is greater than what they're making as a helper in Hong Kong. This is the kind of virtual job that did not exist a year ago, right? Accelerated because of COVID, because it couldn't have other opportunities. Billions of dollars of new wealth was created in the Philippines, in rural Philippines, which has now become an election issue actually in those areas. More crypto wallets have opened up. There are more crypto wallets in the Philippines than there is credit cards, right? So talk about also what that means for financial inclusion, right? It's really incredible. But really, the result of this is a failing of an existing system that has served very well, decades ago, but doesn't serve today. I mean, you think about children, going through the traditional schooling and then eventually college and all that stuff. The outcome that they're entering into this world full of debt is actually one that is likely to be negative rather than positive, right? Which was unthinkable for us as parents, but is now the reality. So it requires that redrawing. And part of this is to do with, just broadly how we learn. So the school system learns a certain way. Unfortunately, things like tutoring, we feel reinforces an old form of learning, because that's, EdTech education is an interesting one because the client is not the customer, right? But actually, how do our children learn? Actually, they play games, right? They're online, and while it was frivolous before, now actually they could be learning these constructs within the game environment. And maybe, what we're seeing now is that this learning happens with sort of activities in games that happen to them as they're introduced, right? Kind of like how in the older days, we might learn about money and value because we're trading with our friends, we're trading cards, and we're doing that kind of stuff, right? Today, actually, people are exchanging, these type of things in virtual games and trading game assets and learning about value, but still in a kind of full way. But I see Roblox, for instance, frankly, as potentially as one of the biggest education platforms in a sense, right? Because all the children engage there, but they're not really, you could use something like that to sort of deliver learning where the children are, as opposed to asking children to go somewhere to learn, right? As an example, or for instance, as well as when you think about sort of a work in the metaverse, right? But because it's a parallel universe, there is not much understanding. And because particularly the parents are not in a position to tell them sort of where to go, or there's no school, which high school sort of teaches anything around the space, right? It's really hard. So I think there is a reframing needed, and it's already kind of happening, where, whether it's game companies or even platforms like Facebook or certainly YouTube, I mean, YouTube's a great illustration, right? I mean, who would have thought that YouTube would be the biggest education platform in the world, right? Certainly in its origin, that wasn't the design. So there's going to be, I think, a sort of a complete mashup of this, and I think it's absolutely important because we can no longer, the existing education frame has led to disappointing outcomes and will continue to lead to disappointing outcomes because they're generally still dealing with frameworks that are sort of historical.
It's really exciting, and actually it also reminds me of, as background, I have a fintech background, a financial background, and we've always been thinking about finance embedded into different products and platforms. So you were consuming finance without even knowing it, in a way, without the need to go to a bank. And in a way, what you're mentioning, it also reminds me, and I see many parallels of, you are consuming education, you're learning, but you don't need to, wear your bag, go to school, but you're actually doing it while, in a way, you're consuming another product, which is very exciting. And you mentioned also something key, which is inclusion. I like to believe that there is really, in a way, no real innovation without also making sure that education becomes more accessible. And there is also, I've been hearing a lot, sustainable innovation, of course, but sometimes we struggle to understand and to define what it is. Vinit, since you also, you come from an educator background, in your opinion, what are the prerequisites for sustainable innovation when it comes to learning?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good question because, we here at Learn Capital, we actually have sort of an internal impact measurement system where we actually collect data on what we call KIIs, or key impact indicators, on each one of our core investments, where the founders actually define the key impact indicators across metrics related to what we call reach, performance, and intensity. And all three of those words mean different things, but I've been focused a lot doing research recently, in particular on sort of the reach category, because across Learn Capital's portfolio, our portfolio companies are easily reaching 500 million plus learners each and every year, right? Across effectively every country on the planet. And, the more research that we do, I think the more that we recognize, and this will not necessarily be what I would say a profound statement, but it's one that is having ripple effects across the entire education technology sector. So it's still a point that I feel needs to be made explicitly. One cannot overstate the importance of mobile technology and the role that that's played in democratizing access to high quality education, particularly in emerging markets, right? This is a case where, if you look at the digital infrastructure in a country like, let's take Bangladesh, for example. So I recently led a seed deal in a company called Shiko, which is effectively the sort of leading content-first digital EdTech player in the country of Bangladesh. That's a case where in Bangladesh, mobile infrastructure has grown so quickly, finally to a point where a company like Shiko can partner with some of the large telcos in the country and immediately have a distribution, an at-scale distribution channel for exceptionally high quality learning content directly into the hands of individuals who didn't have it before, right? So, and even when I look across our portfolio, right, we have companies in our portfolio, like one called SoloLearn, and this company is actually based in Armenia, but SoloLearn is actually the leader in mobile first code learning, irrespective of what age you are. So you can actually learn directly how to code within this one singular app, a range of different languages. There's a built-in code compiler, so people are actually building like new games and directly coding within the app itself. SoloLearn has a global community of over 40 million, right? So as long as you have access to a mobile phone and have access to the internet in some way, shape, or form, you can immediately start learning bite-sized content in a way that you just weren't able to do before. So like I said, I know it's not necessarily a profound statement, but for us, like when we think about accessibility and how you scale access to the most efficacious sort of learning content or services around the world, one really cannot overstate the role of mobile as sort of the kind of global distribution platform of choice. And we think that's going to remain for quite some time. So, we continue to be really excited in investing in, high growth, high surface area, mobile first, apps, services, content across the sort of age, different age ranges across education.
And Bill, how, of course, we talk about inclusion in a way, something, of course, that impacts that a lot is the digital divide that is still very present for both kids and adults. How can we address that, in your opinion?
In the last decades, most EdTech investments done in China are selling products and services which are great, are good, but also are expensive. But I think in the future, we are trying to invest in EdTech companies that are providing products and services that are good and cheap, and that 10 times students and the people can afford it. That's a future trend, like SaaS services, software as a services. I think that education has a lot to do with the content and the services. And as for services, we need more great teachers, which require a lot of time to train and to prepare. But as for content, as for artificial intelligence empowered contents and simulated services, that can be very cheap. So I think the best way to minor the digital divide is to provide some content and simulated services that is of great quality but cheap. So that's something we are trying to do, because, for example, we are dealing with a kindergarten SaaS company which can provide a great deal of great content and curriculum of very low prices for about 30 million. It's not 30 million. It's about 0.3 million kindergartens in China. I think that's one example of how we can provide very good content with low prices. And also, I can see that also even in China, we have places that are not that accessible to internet. I think around the world there are still many students and kids and even adults who do not have easy access to internet. So I think the good structure of digital contents is also very important. So, but luckily we see that we are sending more spaceships in outer space, and we have 5G and even 6G in the coming decades, and we can see many good digital contents of great quality at a very cheap prices to the majority of kids and even adults. So I see solutions to the digital divide, and but this requires more patient money and patient entrepreneurs to get into these spaces and to build very good quality product and services, and to provide them to the great deal of people. So I think in the future, in the next decades, EdTech investment may be something from a pure financially investment into something financial and impact driven investment. And we are looking forward to see more patient limited partners and and patient entrepreneurs, and also some people who are of great interest of EdTech innovation to get into this field and to build some digital contents that is almost free for the majority. That's one solution that I can see, and the governments and the private foundations can play a very important roles in this field. That's my opinion.
So maybe I can just add a comment here. So yeah, I think this is all important. I think one of the things that sometimes, particularly with learning and education, sort of purpose and mission oriented is super important, right? And there's different ways in which one can look at sort of, you know, why are you here and why are you doing this, right? And so I think when you talk about digital divide, access to devices, if you look at places like the Philippines, no longer is the problem, right? Because actually everyone has a mobile phone, and as Vinit mentioned, right, you know, it can't be understated just how important this device is, because it essentially is a pathway to the world, right, for, you know, all that access, right? But I think the challenging thing here is when whatever product is delivered or offered to them, you know, what is a mind frame? And I think a lot of people talk about sort of how do we address the digital divide? How can we include more people? And I kind of think sometimes that misses the point, because I think the framework we need to think about sort of is more one of equity, because we can offer devices to everyone, but actually it doesn't mean anything. I think inclusion is a subset of the thinking of equity. And I think when we as investors, when we want to back a business, what is their thinking? I think our role here is to say, okay, which is the entrepreneur we should be backing? We should be backing the entrepreneur who's not just, you know, for purpose and mission, but if he thinks of how do I make it equitable, right? You know, how can we do something that has a framework around that? Then inclusion will happen from within that, right? And the addressing of it, because their mind frame is around sort of how do I deliver this to all stretches, and if these communities are not able to access it, even though they have a smartphone or they have a device, how do I reach out to them? How do I create a level playing field? Is it my life values, right? And I think this is where, you know, we as investors have an influence, because we can pick out the entrepreneurs who care about that, and then we can back them. Because, you know, and one of the struggles I personally have seen with EdTech is, living in Hong Kong in particular, we see this a lot, right? Or China for that matter, is, you know, tutoring has been in the past certainly a very, very sort of, I guess, financially good returns for the most part. We have never invested in any tutoring companies ourselves, because we felt it wasn't something that was aligned with this idea of equity. And I think this is the thing. We can't influence people to do what they can, but we have, you know, money, right? And we can invest. And so we should sort of invest in the purposes here. And if we can reframe that, then we can go away from a system that actually inadvertently breeds inequity, even though it may be inclusive.
Fantastic, great messages. And most importantly, I hope that the entrepreneurs in the room are hearing you very well. Then when they pitch to you, they know what to say. Really great. So I'm seeing also in the chat that we have some activity. I have a couple more questions for you guys, but please, to everyone in the audience, do start putting questions in the Slido, that we will pick them up in a few minutes. So please feel free to start. Also in the chat of Zoom, but Slido would be preferable. To go back just a couple more questions. And James, I would like to ask you, you invested in many startups globally, and EdTech is really a global phenomenon these days, a global market. Would you like to share some examples of cross-border partnerships between EdTech startups on one side and funders, investors on the other side, especially maybe in Hong Kong, Asia market, and if you can highlight any particular areas? James, if you'd like to start, of course, with your insights, but I will be also very keen to hear Bill's perspective of mainland China, and of course, yeah, the role that Hong Kong can play.
Yeah, I'll start off with just maybe, you know, blanket observations over the years is it's not easy necessarily, and there's no sort of one size fits all approach of globalizing that works. I think, what we've seen, can help ranges from, institutional and corporate partnerships that, effectively provide access to, perhaps students studying at institutions, corporates that obviously have access to workforce, etc. Other areas where we've seen a degree of success is things like language learning, right? When you think about sort of the import-export dynamic of, those that, let's say, can teach English, those that want to learn English, frankly, those that want to learn Chinese or an Asian language, figuring out sort of where is the supply of those that can deliver the offering. And that, technology more and more has really broken down the barriers. And, sort of companies like an italki out of, Asia and Hong Kong, having massive audience and also massive kind of educators, some of whom, right, aren't trained teachers, but can become teachers, to the earlier point around, the platforms are there for people to be able to deliver, education, much differently than they could have years ago. So I start with kind of some of those high level kind of comments because, historically it can be tough, right? There's a lot of localization that can be needed, language wise, sometimes cultural norms and sensitivities. And by and large, it does take local partners, we believe, to be that much more successful in deploying outside of your home region, right? And so let's say from a funding perspective, as you said, having local presence that is aware of how you would even begin to localize your product or offering and whom would be a trusted partner in that region to work with really is critical. And so in some areas, we see that in terms of foundation, perhaps increasing access, perhaps even subsidizing the cost of certain things to populations that are more in need or frankly don't have the resources today. And that's an area where I think all of us, from impact lens, would like to do more, right? Where can we access that type of funding that can really sort of bring better forms of education, higher quality into the hands of those that need it the most? I'll give another example, which is around, online healthcare education. We backed a company recently where, they touch students in 190 different countries, even though they only market actively in the US. And so that is one example where, the body by and large functions the same, right, in Asia as it does in the US or Africa or Latin America. And so things like that, we believe, have the power to reach, a global audience. At the same time, to have credibility, you may need, a branding with an institutional partner so that you've been vetted, for example. So, in a lot of ways, reaching the institutions that have brand recognition can matter a lot. Vinit mentioned companies like Upgrad, and they partner with institutions because that can help sort of how you reach and access on the consumer side. Because I think we all have acknowledged that reaching consumers can be very expensive, right? When you have the sort of big tech kind of managing a lot of the flows of those dollars, and so how do you find ways to more efficiently access broader populations? So it's a smattering of things just because it can be hard. And again, no one size fits all approach we've seen works. And frankly, there's a lot of trial and error, candidly, when we've thought about any companies expanding beyond their home regions.
Bill, Yat, would you like to add anything, or maybe also Vinit in regards to also the involvement that family offices and foundations can have in the space? If you would like to say anything, just please feel free.
Yes, before the Chinese government regulation, and I've seen many EdTech funds outside China are trying to invest in Chinese deals. Like we have some vocational and vocational training EdTech companies or SaaS platform companies are receiving dollars from US, from European, and from many family funds from the outside of China. But in the last decades, a lot of money are pouring in Chinese EdTech market, and they are reaching their IPO strand in IPO stage this year in 2021. But suddenly, and they could not get an IPO from US or from Hong Kong or China, so which means that a lot of money are stuck in all those education giants. So which give a temporary period to the trend of US dollars pouring into Chinese market. And but in the last 2 years, I also see a reverse trend. I see many great EdTech companies are booming from outside of China, like India, like US, like Europe. And I can see that different business models and different products and services are booming because they are not trying to compete with each other head to head. You know, in China, if a business model is proven, and a lot of companies are trying to do the similar things, and the ability to raising money and the ability to developing a great team and a developing organization becomes paramount. But I see a very good trend is that outside of China, we see fewer head-to-head competitions, and we see business models can be developed in different ways. And so I see some new opportunities outside of China. That's why some of the Chinese EdTech funds or even venture capital funds are trying to find opportunities outside of China. So I can see that in both systems, inside of China and outside of China, there are many good stuff. Like Chinese companies are very good at internet product and large services. Like outside of China, companies are very good at developing relatively good business models, and the customers are more willing to pay. So I think that they are learning from each other, and I see many Chinese entrepreneurs are moving outside of China, like they are building headquarters in Singapore to find their new markets. And I can also see that even in this area, there are many EdTech entrepreneurs outside of China are coming to mainland China to see some reverse opportunity. So I think that in these two business surroundings, and entrepreneurs and investors and even family offices can learn from each other how they operate. So I think we can see more close connections or cooperations across the borders in the future.
Yeah, great. So Alessio, maybe just from a Hong Kong perspective, I guess. Yeah, just maybe some Hong Kong thoughts on this one. I guess wearing the Hong Kong hat, we're Hong Kong. It's a Hong Kong event, right? Anyway, I think when we think about learning and sort of education, I think the outcome, I think that most of us would like to see is how it also not just benefits globally but also domestically, right? Like after all, different places have different outcomes for the education system to serve their particular domestic needs. And I think in this case, Hong Kong has a rather unique position because on one hand, of course, it has the Hong Kong local aspect, but it is by definition a global society, right? Just because of its colonial past, because of the fact that English is an official language. And therefore, I think where Hong Kong plays a unique positioning here is that also being the bridge to China. I mean, it's interesting how, when you think about the world of geopolitics, and we don't have to discuss that here, obviously, but there is a role and an importance to have a bridge that basically interacts with the world, because I think we can all recognize that China is a global power and has an impact on the world. What is that bridge? And what is the function of a place like Hong Kong, what it should serve? And the fact that it has able to bridge in sort of Western culture, Western mindset, English as a primary language, English as the legal language, but yet still part of Chinese territory, embedded with Chinese culture and Chinese traditions and all that comes with that, gives Hong Kong a unique perspective. And I think this is where maybe, when you think about sort of the framing, I would say that Hong Kong isn't necessarily prepping itself there, but that's the opportunity, which also means that for companies building EdTech companies here or thinking about the future, because I think of anything in EdTech as really building the future, because we are sort of teaching our children about where the world is going to go. There is a role here to play for that. And then obviously there might be global ambitions or China ambitions that emerge from that. Hong Kong has always been good as a sort of melting pot of those type of ideas. But of course it's a challenge because we're moving towards this tension. I mean, also a world that is rapidly changing. And so I think that but because it's smaller, actually, Hong Kong could shape itself faster because it's easier to actually create change to a smaller group than to a big country where you're going to have to suddenly shift entire groups throughout entire provinces. You could do so more rapidly. So I think Hong Kong could play this unique sort of global sort of bridging role.
Fantastic. We have quite a few actually questions I'm seeing. So how about we move to we have a bit more than 5 minutes, and I would like to ask you some questions. And I see really great activity, so that's fantastic. So maybe Vinit, I'll ask you the most voted one. What are ways we can help parents or teachers better understand the gaming experiences children are already in to be open to exploring educational apps with them, I guess?
Got it. Okay, so basically, how can we empower both sort of parents and teachers to sort of work with different, or basically like explore different like apps or services in service of their children? Is that effectively the question?
Exactly. Yeah, that the children are really familiar with, I guess.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a really good question, right? Because I would say, like, at least here in the United States, and I think James, you'd be able to speak to this as well, right? Like if you're a parent and you're looking for like great content for your child, and you go to like both iOS or Android right now, and you go to either like the App Store or Google Play, you're just going to see a flood of apps and a flood of content, right? I think there's definitely a thinking here in the United States now that within schools, at home, the number of digital services that are available for both schools and parents directly is and can be a little bit overwhelming, right? And for you as a parent or for you as a teacher wanting to deliver the best possible content to a student or a child, oftentimes it could be really, really difficult to find ultimately what content is best. And so there are, like, over the years, there have been like some open source projects, right? And I'm speaking within the US context now, but there have been some open source projects on sort of like crowdsourced rankings of different apps or services, based on just either anecdotal experience or based on actual efficacy studies, right? There have also been several large nonprofits here in the United States that have attempted to do at scale sort of third-party reviews of, third-party objective reviews of different apps and services. And so, look, like there definitely hasn't been a panacea, and I'd be curious to know if James agrees or disagrees with this, but discoverability of exceptional content, exceptional apps, exceptional services, like still at scale remains to be like a really big problem that hasn't necessarily been solved.
James, I'll let you complement, but also there is another question which can be also relatable, which is any successful social emotional learning EdTech examples that you can mention. So maybe related to what we were saying also about experience.
Yeah, just briefly on Vinit's point. I mean, it's a really it's an important question that I don't think has gotten addressed properly for some sensible reasons and perhaps non-sensible reasons. But by and large, historically, to truly have kind of the science-backed data, you would have to commission expensive studies, oftentimes with some form of research teachers college or some equivalent school of education. And that's how they would sort of measure performance. And oftentimes, certainly in the US, things were very much focused on state exams that were oftentimes summative in nature, which was at most biannual or most, semi-annual, but oftentimes annual. So you had just this historical kind of, slowness of getting to the right data and quick enough to make good decisions. So that was the history, if not the status quo in many ways, right? I think what we're seeing now is the feedback loops are shortening, whether it's because formative assessment, which is, short quizzes, real-time assessments, is really taking shape more and more. And I think companies are understanding that they have to do it, if not manage it themselves, right? They cannot rely on a third-party sort of, verification system that just may take too long. And so if you're intellectually honest about it, you will create the effort yourself to measure impact. And certainly you need investors like all of us around the table that hopefully will push that, with intentionality and purpose. As it relates to social emotional learning, candidly, I think I've seen better success out of, things that chip away at it from a measurement perspective, because you have to sort of diagnose before you can really intervene. So I can't profess to say I have any sort of great offerings that are on the intervention side. In terms of measurement platforms, there's companies like Panorama here in the US that work with the schools to at least, have data and insights that allow administrators and teachers to work with the knowledge of where are their problems and, where can I flag early indications where I need to get involved. Ultimately, I think, as we all know, the live interaction, the live sort of presence of a teacher or just frankly a caring adult or a student matters the most, right? So how do you get to the student, sooner and faster? I will say the technology that, helps in that is the nudging, whether it's, tech-enabled chat-like bot, where there's real people and human sort of interaction, but it is just more automated, right? So again, just more quickly getting to individuals that need assistance and help and figuring out how to diagnose it. That's where I've seen more progress than not.
Fantastic.
Sorry, I think I may have read the question slightly differently, but maybe just very quickly, in the context of the question, maybe I read it more as how do we understand the gaming experiences children are having? Is that anyway? I just wanted to sort of address it from that perspective of in the virtual world, the way I recommend parents to engage with their children is not one on a classic hierarchical parent-child level, but more at a peer level, or because they're very likely, children anyway, to be vastly superior in the virtual world than they are. And just try to play a game with your kids and they'll just kick your ass anytime, right? And I think the engagement of that, if you take a look at parents who play Minecraft with their children, for instance, they don't have to be good at Minecraft. In fact, it's quite okay to be bad at it. But it creates a scenario where children are learning about sort of actually teaching something to their parents, which is empowering in and of itself, right? And that's something that is, at least in this part of the world, an unusual relationship, especially with young children, because after all, we as parents are supposed to be telling our children what to do, right? We know everything. But actually in this virtual construct, we don't know everything. In fact, we perhaps know much less. And I think this creates this peer relationship, which is quite empowering. And I feel like certainly what I recommend parents to do is to be in that world with them. Just how we watch sports, right? I mean, it's okay for us to be watching, basketball games, but we're not good at basketball for our children's sports games, right? So why don't we do the same for esports? Again, we don't have to be good at it, but we have to understand that world. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to actually teach them anything, or for that matter, we're going to create conflict because there is a generational bifurcation because we don't engage in their world and we force them to exclusively engage in ours because that's where we want them to be, but that's not necessarily where they want to be.
Very good point. Yeah, thank you very much for concluding on that. Unfortunately, we got to the end of this amazing panel. Yat, Bill, Vinny, and James, thank you very much for being with us. I personally really enjoyed it and learned a lot, and I'm sure all in the audience feel the same. To everyone, thank you very much. Also, I'd like to say big congratulations to both Esperanza and Cyberport for this amazing seminar. and I look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thank you.